By understanding that the millennium is a symbol for the church age, it can be readily seen that there's actually 7 parallel passages of the end times in the book of Revelation. As we've seen in previous parts in this series, the millennium is actually a symbolic name or term for the church age. It's not a literal 1,000 of years, and the key aspects, the binding of Satan and the first resurrection, are symbols for things that happen in the church age. And when we understand that, that allows for a clearer understanding of the order of the end time events, which are very simple in the Bible. It's the church age, which is right after that there's a great tribulation. It's the loosing of Satan, and it lasts just a little season. And then the last day. The last day is Judgment Day. It's the resurrection of, there's a general resurrection, and people that are unsaved are resurrected for judgment, and people that are saved are resurrected with Christ to eternity. So the purpose of this study is to look at the 7 parallel passages that become uncovered and clear once we have a right understanding of the millennium. Okay, just to reiterate, so the order of end time events, there's 3 pieces, and this is simple. The church age, where Satan was bound, the gospel exploded, it's the first resurrection, Christians are raised to walk in newness of life. The great tribulation, second, Satan is bound, and then during the church age, but in the great tribulation he's loosed. It's a short season, but he goes out and deceives the world again. The gospel's being veiled. And then the last day, which is the day of judgment. It's the day of salvation for God's people, the glorious appearing of Jesus Christ, the day of reward, but it's also the day of judgment for those that are not God's people. And by the way, if you enjoy these studies, please consider subscribing to this channel, Rock of Offense. On the other hand, as we see in premillennialism, instead of those 3 simple concepts, it's a very complex man-made doctrine that keeps people in darkness. And I'm not going to read all these on the slide, but here's a listing of all the things that happen in this order. And it becomes very complicated. There's multiple resurrections. There's a secret rapture. There's different judgments. And very notably, there's an important place for national Israel in what they believe to be the future millennium. So the premillennialism is complex, and they tend to put the book of Revelation in a linear time frame instead of seeing that there's 7 parallel passages concerning the church age, the Great Tribulation, and the final day. Just a quick review of Revelation 20. The church age, Satan is bound for 1,000 years in the abyss. That we may remember in Matthew 12, that the strong man being bound by Christ and his house is plundered is a picture of salvation. It's a picture of the church age. The first resurrection, we spent one lesson on the fact that Christians are raised with Christ. They're resurrected spiritually, awaiting the final bodily resurrection at the last day. But the first resurrection happens when one becomes a Christian. And that's what the millennium really is. And 1,000 years is a symbolic number, which the 1,000 years is symbolically used all through the Bible. There's a loosing of Satan, the great tribulation, right before the last day. And the last day in Revelation 20, and there it's called the Great White Throne Judgment. Death, hell, and those not in the book of life are cast in the lake of fire. But in other places it's called different things. The day of Christ, the day of the Lord, the glorious kingdom of Jesus Christ. There's many names for it. Okay, so the church age, the Great Tribulation, and the last day can be seen all through the Bible. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and 2, if you look at that carefully, the day of Christ, and that before the day of Christ were all the saints. The judgment day and the salvation and the resurrection of the saints is all the same time. And before that time, there's a great tribulation. The man of sin is revealed. And so we can see the same pattern in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1 and 2. In addition, the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, and all through the Old Testament prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all the minor prophets, Daniel, we can see the 3 features, the church age, And then there's a time of great tribulation. Then there's the final day, which again is a day of resurrection of the saints, and it's a day of judgment for those that are not God's people. So the purpose of this study, and we're not going to go through obviously all the passages in detail, but this is just a layout that there are 7 parallel last day passages in Revelation. And when we look at those, we can see, like in this slide, we showed the 7 occurrences of Judgment Day. So the Judgment Day is called different things. It's the 6th seal, it's the 7 thunders, it's the raising of the 2 witnesses. Kingdoms belong to Christ. The judgment, the harvest day, the 7 balls of judgment, judgment of Babylon, marriage supper of Christ, and the great white throne judgment. And through the rest of the Bible, there's many other names for the day of Christ. So we see, though, in the book of Revelation, once we realize there is no millennium, and we can see that these 7 parallel passages on Judgment Day, and I would encourage everybody to look at these verses very carefully to see that they all point to that final Judgment Day, then we can construct in the book of Revelation that same pattern about the church age, the great tribulation, and the last day. So, and that's what we're going to do in the next 7 slides. We're going to just look at those 7 patterns, if you will, or parallel passages, and then we'll go into those in detail in other studies. The first view of the church age, the great tribulation, the last day, are the first 6 seals. The scrolls open, the 144,000, the great multitude. And we see the church age is the first 3 seals, which are the 3 first horsemen. The 144,000 sealed represent all those that are saved in the church age. The great tribulation, the 4th horseman, or the pale horse that has death and Hades following, the souls slain under the altar, Revelation 9 to 11. Or I'm sorry, verses 9 to 11, Revelation 6. And the great multitude from the great tribulation, Revelation 7. And then we see followed up in the 6th seal, it's the last day. It's the great earthquake, mountains and islands are moved, the sun's black, moon's blood, stars fell from heaven. People called for the rocks to cover from the wrath of God. And we see the day of the wrath of God there. So the first view, we can look very simply, and it's these 3 pieces in Revelation 6 and Revelation 7. View 2, it's the 7th seal, which is the first 6 trumpets. And again, the church age, the first 4 trumpets. We see the 3rd of trees, the 3rd of sea, water, sun, moon, stars, and truck. And the 3rd always represents tribulation or trials on Christians. And we can, when we piece those passages together, we can see it's the normal trials that a Christian endures. Our faith is tried as in the fire. In the great tribulation, which is the 5th trumpet, the locust from the bottomless pit is open. The bottomless pit is where Satan is bound. And the great tribulation shows that he's unbound. And he goes out to harm and again to slay the 3rd part of men. And that's not a physical killing, but that's a persecution. It's the silencing of the true Christians during the great tribulation. And finally, the last day, we see the mighty angel clothed with a cloud. Christ comes with the clouds of glory. A rainbow on his head, which is the covenant, comes down from heaven, and there's 7 thunders. And we see that Revelation 10 represents Judgment Day. So that's the second view in these 7 parallel passages. The third view is in Revelation 11, and that is the measuring of the temple, the 2 witnesses, and the 7th trumpet. The 2 witnesses are active in the church age, Revelation 11. In the Great Tribulation, the 2 witnesses are the beast, which is the Antichrist, makes war on the 2 witnesses, and their bodies lie dead for 3.5 days, which represents the Great Tribulation. And then there's the last day, which is very clear in Revelation 11 here. It's a great earthquake, 7,000 again, which is a symbolic number. It means the complete fullness of men are killed. It's the Judgment Day. Kingdoms of earth are now belong to Christ. The final kingdom is here. It's Judgment Day. God's wrath has come. Again, the wrath of God. So we see the third view of Judgment Day. Moving right on to the fourth view, the woman, the child, and the satanic trinity. And this is Revelation 12 through 14, those 3 chapters. And in chapter 12, we see the woman represents the church from which Christ was born. The child is clearly a representation of Christ. the great red dragon, which is Satan, the war in heaven, and Satan was cast out. And he lost on the cross. Christ rendered powerless the Satan. Satan was defeated at the cross. And we see that in the church age, Revelation 12. Revelation 13, we see the two beasts. The first is the Antichrist, 7 horns and 10 heads, full of blasphemy, made war with the saints 42 months. That's a representation of the Great Tribulation. It's the 3.5 years, which corresponds to the 3.5 days that the 2 witnesses were killed. And then the second beast is the false prophet. 2 horns like a lamb, that's the false church. He has the image of the beast and the number of the name of the beast. And anybody that wants to participate in the church has to have this name and this number. Revelation 13. And then finally, Revelation 14 are multiple examples of the last day. The 144,000 with the Lamb on Mount Zion is the resurrection of the saints. And then the message of the 3 angels. Babylon is falling, the beast worshippers will be judged, and the harvest of the earth. Again, we see the same pattern, the church age, the Great Tribulation, and the last day. Number 5, and this is just Revelation 15 and 16, but it's limited to just a more focused, longer explanation of Judgment Day, and it has all these symbols for what happens on the Judgment Day. The earth is struck, the sea is struck, the waters become as blood. Again, the sun, we might remember from the first view where the sun became dark and the moon became as blood. The seed of the beast, the kingdom of Satan, is full of darkness. It's judged. Euphrates, the kings of the east, the 3 frogs with the spirits of devils are judged. And then the final thunders and lightning, earthquake, the wrath on Babylon. So we see all of those things when we look at them carefully are spiritual portraits of judgment. And they're listed as 7 bowls, but they're all happening concurrently. The 6th view of the end times in the book of Revelation is Babylon riding the scarlet beast and the marriage supper of the Lord. And we see that in Revelation 17, 18, and 19. And we see the Great Tribulation is part of Revelation 17, 18, the rise of Babylon. It's the false prophet, the false church at the end time, riding the beast. Satan is now loosed from and he's no longer bound in the bottomless pit. So it's the church riding on top of Satan with false doctrine, false gospel, abominations of idolatry, and it all represents fornication. And we see, just as a side note, we see a lot of parallels between Babylon to the church of the Old Testament, which was Israel and Judah. Similar parallels. So we know that the church in the Old Testament is also at the end of the time of that church. It was a symbol for the end times and for the Great Tribulation. The last day, we see that Babylon is judged, and we see plagues in one day, death, mourning, famine, burn with fire. And then in Revelation 19, we see all type of things about Judgment Day, the marriage supper of the Lamb, but also judgment and things that were involved with judgment. Okay, and then the 7th view brings us back to where we started, which is Revelation 20, the millennium, the loosing of Satan and the great white throne judgment. And again, the millennium is a picture of the church age. Satan is bound, the gospel goes forth. The first resurrection, which is the salvation of Christians. The Great Tribulation, Satan's loose for a little season to deceive the saints. And then the last day, the great white throne judgment. So we see these 7 views in Revelation, but the key is understanding the millennium opens up that these 7 views are really repeating 7 parallel passages. So just a final summary, Revelation 20 is an example of the end time order of events, the church age, the great tribulation, the last day. And the last day includes both judgment and salvation, our resurrection into our glorified spiritual bodies. There's these 7 repeating patterns in the book of Revelation, but these patterns actually repeat all through the Bible. 2 Thessalonians we looked at briefly, but also elsewhere in the New Testament. All the prophets of the Old Testament, if we look carefully and we understand Israel being a picture of the church, we can see the same pattern of the church age, and then a great tribulation, and then judgment. So we see this pattern all through the Bible, and again, understanding the millennium as the church age unlocks all this beautiful wisdom in the Bible. Please visit the rockofoffense.com for more details. Also, please subscribe to this channel so that you can get automatic updates. And I thank you very much for listening.